Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to episode 56 of the Eat for Endurance podcast. My name is Claire Schornstein, and I am a board-certified sports dietitian and runner based in Santa Cruz, California. My goal for this show is to inspire you all in your own training and fueling, and to demonstrate that there is no one-size-fits-all nutrition approach towards optimal health and sports performance. I aim to do this through a combination of nutrition profiles featuring high-performing athletes, interviews with fellow dietitians on their areas of expertise, and solo episodes on various nutrition topics. Today, I'm bringing on sports dietitian Kylee Van Horn of Fly Nutrition to chat all things relating to winter sports nutrition. Kylee is based in Colorado, works with private nutrition clients engaging in winter and other sports, and is a runner and winter athlete herself. Since I haven't skied in 20 years and the extent of my winter sports experience recently is literally sledding down a small hill in New York City, I thought it would be a good idea to bring her on the show to discuss the many unique nutrition challenges that winter athletes face and how to fuel both smartly and adequately in these conditions. We had a great discussion filled with tons and tons of winter fueling tips. So if you engage in any winter sports or you want to in the future, grab a pen and get ready to take some notes. Without further ado, please enjoy my episode with Kylee Van Horn of Fly Nutrition. Hi, Kylee. Welcome to the Eat for Endurance podcast. How's it going today?
Really good. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you about some winter sports nutrition today.
Yeah, and you're based out in Colorado, right? Which part are you in?
I am actually up in the mountains near Aspen.
Ooh. Oh, wow. So you're like really in... So this is why I had you on, because you're clearly the winter sports expert and you're like living it every day. But before we dive into today's sports nutrition topic, which is winter sports nutrition, I'd love for you just to share a bit about your background, both as an athlete and as a sports dietitian.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been a runner since I was about 10. Grew up on the East Coast and ran in high school and then at the University of Richmond in Virginia. And then I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials of the marathon in about 2010. Didn't quite make it. And then I met my husband and actually switched over to trail running. So from there, I kind of got into trail and mountain running. And then I have gotten more into like winter sports as well, skate skiing and ski mountaineering. So that's kind of my athletic background. And then in regards to the nutrition background, I was actually involved I was a college coach for a little while. And then I worked for Ironman, North America for a little while after I got my degree at University of Richmond, which was actually in pre-veterinary medicine. So I thought I was going to go to vet school, decided not to, did some event production with Ironman and some coaching. And then I went back to school in Denver for the nutrition piece. And I got my nutrition degree. Excuse me, sorry. I got my nutrition degree from Metro State University in Denver in 2013, and then I worked actually a little bit in the more like natural foods industry for a while, and then I finished my RD in 2018, and that's about the time when I did my internship and everything. I was like, I really want to do my own private practice, so I decided that I was going to do private practice and just work with endurance athletes because that's, pretty much my life, I feel like, has been endurance sports. And my husband's a big, like, ultra endurance runner and ski mountaineer. So we kind of nerd out on endurance sports stuff at home sometimes. So it's a really good fit for my business and the clients that I really enjoy working with. And that's where Fly Nutrition came from. So I've been in private practice for about 4 years now, and it's been amazing. I love it so much.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing all that. And I definitely can relate to much of that. Not the winter sport part. Well, I grew up, in Santa Cruz and, close to Tahoe. So I would go skiing every year, a couple times a year, and was okay at it, but pretty much stopped all that in when was it? I guess after high school. And the extent of my winter sports, and this is pathetic, is like literally sledding down a hill in Manhattan when I was in New York City. Like really not much going on over there. But I do all the ultra running, and my husband also was the one who dragged me into trail running. So so we also nerd out on all things endurance and trail running over here as well. Nice. Awesome. Okay, great. So let's get into today's topic. This episode was actually inspired by one of my running clients who also does a handful of winter sports, including ski touring. And I realized that this would just be such a great thing to bring onto the podcast because there are many unique nutrition challenges that are very specific to winter sports. And I reached out to you because at the time there were some challenges and things. Like, obviously, there are many guidelines and principles that apply, but if you're not like really in the world of some of these specific winter sports, it can be harder to come up with some of the more creative solutions. And I reached out to you just for the sake of my audience members who may not know what happened. I reached out to you, to this community that we belong to for sports dietitians, just kind of being like, hey, can anyone help with, some advice about how to help my client get some more nutrition in these very specific circumstances. And you came up with some really creative solutions, as did some others. So that's why I really wanted to bring you on. So I'm really glad you could join me today to tackle this topic. I want to start by identifying, what do we mean when we say winter sports? So which winter sports would you say deserve to be highlighted for our discussion? And we already kind of mentioned a few, but let's just list them out just to and we can't be comprehensive, but let's just throw some out there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the most common that I work with are going to be our skate skiing, our classic skiing, and that is categorized as like Nordic skiing as a general category. And then we've got ski mountaineering, which is where you climb up the mountain with I like to call them little carpets on the bottom of your skis. So they're called skins, and you put those on the bottom of your skis, or you can they have split boards for snowboarding, and climb up, down, or snowboard down. And there are actual like races, which we can maybe chat about in a bit, that people will do that are longer on ski mountaineering, like backcountry type skis. So that brings about like backcountry touring, which I feel like is almost a little bit different because you typically are using like a little bit heavier gear, whereas ski mountaineering is more like a race lighter weight gear. And then we also have our downhill skiing and snowboarding. And so that would be the ones that I would say I work with the most. Like, I don't work particularly with hockey players. I grew up playing ice hockey actually, but I work more with the the downhill skiers and snowboarders, ski mountaineering, and skate and cross country and classic skiing.
Yeah, and that's really what I want to highlight too, is like the outdoor winter sports for the most part, because obviously you can run in the snow and do all these things, and that also presents some nutrition challenges as well. But the ones I really wanted to focus on was what I wanted to bring you in for were the things I knew less about just and have not experienced myself. So and when you say ski mountaineering, that's the same thing as ski touring then?
So yes and no, like slightly.
Okay. Just because I need to be educated, clearly.
Oh no, it's okay. It's like there isn't really an official definition or anything, but I would say when we're talking about ski mountaineering, like oftentimes we're referencing like lighter weight gear that's used to race. So ski mountaineering racing, or skimo is the short word for it. So skimo racing is oftentimes the verbiage used. And then but you could technically take lighter weight gear in the backcountry and do a ski tour. But I would say when I think of like ski touring, it's like more leisurely, and you might be climbing up and skiing like high peaks in the backcountry, but you typically are going to want to use like heavier gear versus using like the lighter weight ski mountaineering race gear. Does that make sense on the clarification?
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we've identified the winter sports that we're going to be discussing. Now let's chat about some of the nutrition challenges that these athletes may face. So the ones that immediately come to mind for me that would affect an athlete's ability to fuel adequately, or an athlete's nutrition requirements would be things like extreme cold, elevation, and logistical issues relating to gear. But I'm sure you can identify many more, or maybe we can just expand upon that. But what other nutrition considerations do you think we need to keep in mind amongst these various sports?
I mean, the ones that you pointed out are, I think we can like break them down
Yeah.
into like the liquid like hydration piece, and then
Mm-hmm.
also the calorie piece and all of
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
for elevation, for cold temps, etc. So I wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily, I would say maybe, and again, like it wouldn't be a separate category in its own, because we're going to talk about
Mm.
it and out like the elevation, etc., like how to carry things, etc. I
Yep.
think that's just going to fall into the categories that you just mentioned. So we might as well
Okay.
just
All right, let's
kind
do
of go into
it.
this.
All right.
Um,
So yeah, let's why don't we tackle extreme cold first, because you had that those are some of the things you listed out to, in response to my initial question before, when I initially reached out to you, some strategies, or maybe we first identify like what changes, maybe some physiological changes with extreme cold. How does that affect an athlete's body or nutrition needs, and how do we deal with it?
Yeah, so typically our like when we get cold, our body's trying to stay warm, so like blood is going to rush towards the center of gravity, which can, I would say, that affects um maybe when we're talking about fluids. Like I always mention, like if we can try to keep fluids closer to the center of the body, that can actually help with prevention of freezing of the
Hmm.
fluids that you're using. Sometimes when it gets colder, we're also, I think athletes don't, their thirst mechanism is impacted. So
Hmm.
they don't feel the need to actually want to drink. And so that can become problematic for athletes that maybe in summer months, et cetera, are relying on like drinking to thirst for their fluid intake needs. Because in the winter, it almost needs to be a little bit more intentional, because that thirst response is a little bit impeded.
Hmm.
So having a general sense of what am I actually losing fluid wise in the winter, I think can be a good thing for an athlete to get a grasp on, because I wouldn't say that we just want to wing it and
Yeah.
try to listen to thirst response. So there's that. And then we want to keep in mind that you are going to be, like, you lose fluids through respiration. So you're going to be respirating and losing fluids there. Oftentimes athletes are wearing a bunch of gear that could make them sweat,
Hmm.
and thinking about that as a mechanism for them losing more fluids as well. Sometimes have to feel the need to have to go to the bathroom more in the
Yep.
winter. Um, so I just think, like, knowing that fluid requirements are still needed is an important topic of discussion, because I have a lot of athletes that are like, oh yeah, I didn't drink during this whole training session. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, like,
Same.
I mean, you can get away with it, but is that really benefiting your performance? And then are you going to
Hmm.
have, like, how much are you going to have to play catch up to make up for those fluids that you lost and were not replacing?
Exactly. That's one thing. That's a conversation I have all the time with my clients, is like, it's not about what you can do, it's what you should do to help yourself.
Yeah,
It's not like what you can get away
exactly.
with. Got it. So yeah, so why don't you share some of your kind of tried and true strategies to, of things you do in cold weather to kind of help make sure that you're getting foods and fluids into your body. And because you provided us some of these previously, but yeah, maybe some things you recommend to clients or things you try for yourself, whatever
Yeah.
you want to share.
Yeah. So I do kind of like I'll start with, since we were talking about like core being a little bit warmer, keeping
Hmm.
fluids closer to the center of the body. On that note, I find for my like Nordic skiers or ski mountaineers, they might think it's a little bit nerdy, but like actually wearing a hydration vest under a jacket when you are training or racing can be beneficial. And so the jacket over the top of the hydration vest is going to keep heat in more. And then having that hydration vest that put your bottles on the front, so it is keeping that kind of more centered towards your core. And then I've also worked with athletes that have created a custom like sewn in bladder holder on the front of their like jersey or whatever they're wearing, so that they can actually slip the bladder into the custom pocket, and then it's on the front near the stomach area, and that actually can help prevent freezing as well. Because if you think about, if you're having your fluids on your back, that's sometimes further away from that like center core stomach area where your heat is at. So putting it on the front, like a pouch there, and then putting it under a jacket is going to keep that fluid a little bit more centered and help prevent it from freezing. So thinking about like, I think sometimes athletes too, they forget like, oh yeah, we might need to figure out logistics of like, how I'm going to carry these things, or, you know, like little tips that they might want answers of like, well, how much fluid and how much electrolytes, and we will talk about that kind of stuff with them. But these are the other things that we can help with as endurance sports dietitians, is like, oh yeah, well, what are these strategies that we can use to actually carry the fluids so that they're not freezing whenever you know, you're training or racing. So I want to just point that out, that like we have experience with athletes like in regards to the logistical piece too, and I think that can be really beneficial.
Absolutely. I mean, that's literally why I reached out to you, because I have all the experience in many different areas, but this is like the very like, well, which specific gear items can I recommend, or which, you know, like I didn't think about making your own bladder holder in the front, which by the way, why does that not exist as something you can purchase if this is a problem? You know, like
I know
like,
it is
like
weird.
there's a lot of like, or putting socks, I think you had mentioned like putting wrap wool socks around bottles and things. Like you'd think that with the insane number of products available, that more things would be just available for purchase. But anyways, but that was that logistical piece is what I didn't have because I don't do these sports, right?
And
awesome.
and you bring up, like, I do want to mention some of those other things. Sorry, I got off on a tangent there.
Yeah,
but
no
like
worries.
the wool sock thing, like, so putting your soft flask in a wool sock, and then even putting that in your, like, you wear a hydration vest or something, can help keep the thing from freezing. And then another big one is that people don't think about, and this is again another thing, like, you don't think about it sometimes until you actually get out there and you end up in a situation where your fluids freeze. So an athlete might come to me and they're like, oh, I did this race and my bottles froze and all this stuff. So then we're like talking about these strategies. So so another strategy is blowing back into your bottles or your bladder, like in the tube. So you blow back into it, because if you don't, it can quickly freeze on that nozzle. And then that can like totally mess you up in regards to getting your fluids in.
That happened to my husband. He did JFK 50 one year, and it was insanely cold, and he had the bladder in the tube, and it just all froze. It was so
exactly bad. No, it's bad. And like making sure, on the note with the sock, with your bladder, if you have one of those, having an insulated tube is important too. And they actually do make those. So
okay, that's
you can get insulated tubes. You don't have to make your own on that one.
Good.
So those are kind of a couple of the fluid things. And then I know that we have to mention vodka piece.
Oh yeah, I had like brought that up. I actually forwarded that to my client, and she's like, wait, how much vodka do you put in? I'm like, I'm not sure.
Just a small amount.
A tiny amount. Okay.
Yeah, like a half a shot into a bladder or something. Or so if you're doing it in a bottle, I would use less than that. But it does help lower the freezing point. And it
maybe helps keep you warm.
Yeah, exactly. And you really can't taste it.
Takes the edge off a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, so I did, and the reason why I said that this works is because I've used it. My husband and I did the Grand First, which is a ski mountaineering race from Crested Butte to Aspen, Colorado, and it's about 39 miles going through the backcountry, and you leave at midnight in the dark. And it's typically very cold. And you're like, some of these peaks are like, 13,000 feet. So it's even colder up there. So like practicing with the vodka thing, and then we used vodka as one of our strategies in the race, and it worked. So it's a great little tool if somebody wants. Now, we did combine it with other strategies as well, so I guess we can't fully like give credit to the vodka, but it is something that, utilizing that is an option. And then even putting in electrolytes or hydration mix is going to lower the freezing point too. So
that was going to be my question. Are you putting vodka into plain water or putting vodka into like your Scratch or Morton or Tailwind or whatever?
It depends on what someone's fueling plan is, but I did it with a hydration. I use Scratch, so I did it with Scratch. So you can definitely add it into that hydration mix, and not like I said, I didn't really notice it because you're using such a small amount.
Sure.
But yeah, and keeping in mind, that brings up a good like segue here that we do. So we need fluids in the winter, and we also need electrolytes in the winter too, right? Like we're still losing some of those. And I don't know if your clients like tend to forget that piece in the winter conveniently, but yeah, like mine do as well. And they're like, oh, well, I'm not sweating, so I don't need electrolytes. I'm like, actually you are sweating and you do need electrolytes. So
yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing you had mentioned was using baked goods instead of gels, because they don't freeze. Do you have any favorite baked goods that don't like get completely destroyed or smashed or anything?
Yeah, that's the hard part, is trying to figure out, like if you do a pretty dense cookie, can be an option, or some sweet breads are good options. Like muffins are typically going to crumble a lot. But
yeah, exactly.
Breads, you do like banana bread and things like that. Those don't tend to crumble as much, and that is something. So we talked about the fluid piece a little bit, but when you're also need to consider the calorie piece. And so how am I going to get calories in? And something that people don't think about is like, oh, my traditional gels, those might freeze, So you can do, again, strategy wise, we can try to store those like close to the center of our bodies and keep them under a coat and try to keep them warm. But even then, sometimes they're like really hard to prevent from freezing. So you do want to kind of, like, a big mistake that you might make is assuming that your current gels would be fine in a winter race and not really practicing in winter conditions with them or something. And I have had athletes do this, so that's why I'm mentioning it. And then they freeze, and then you have no nutrition.
Yeah.
So you want to just kind of see, like, is this going to hold up to cold temps? You can always put your gels in the freezer to see like how they do in there too.
That's a good idea.
And then you might have to think outside the box a little bit in regards to like where you're getting your calories in.
Yeah.
So
I think energy balls would be good. I make like an oat, like peanut butter chocolate chip energy ball. I feel like those would hold up really well because I keep them in the fridge or freezer anyways, and they're great.
Yeah, that's another really good idea, are the energy balls. And then something that I do, like, especially with my, so logistically, you have to also think about with ski mountaineers, with your skate or classic skiers, they have poles. And so,
yes. I was going to ask about this too.
If they're racing, it's going to be quite difficult to get in nutrition sometimes, because they're not really going to want to maybe take their hands out of their poles very often, and so the intake might be less frequent for them. So thinking about liquid nutrition is a really good thing to consider. Like even your super fuels that are higher calorie
Hmm.
can be really nice for racers. And then that also, like, this is why, again, we work with athletes one-on-one, is because like if you do different types of races, even like a short ski race versus a long ski race, like you might want to do a different pre-race breakfast.
Yeah.
So if you're not, if you aren't going to be able to get in much nutrition in your like 90-minute Nordic skate race or something, you might want to consider like, I might need to load up a little bit more nutrition wise than I think I need to calorie wise, and practice with that too. And then also electrolyte hydration wise, like I might want to get in a little bit more um there too if I'm not able to take in as much during my 90-minute race.
Yeah.
um the super fuels are nice, like I was saying, because you can just, like, if you are wearing a vest, then you can always just like sip out of that and not have to take your hands out of your pulse.
Yeah. Yeah, because
If
that
you're
was one of the challenges. Sorry to interrupt. That was one of the challenges that I was having with my client. Is like, well, she was doing like I mean, she does the ski touring, and as short as 2 hours and much longer. But we were looking at a day where she had a really solid breakfast, but then she did a 2 hour ski tour and basically consumed nothing. And
Mhm.
2 hours, like, yeah, of course you can get away with it, but again, it's not ideal. And she was saying, but her friends they didn't want to stop, like, and then I'm sure you're wearing gloves, and it's like, again, the logistics of like like getting things out. So it's like coming up with these strategies that, well, okay, how can we compromise and figure out some solutions to make sure you're getting something in. And yeah, so I like some of these things that you've been discussing, because I know it's definitely harder than, say, if you're just trail running and you have your vest and you have your hands free and it's not freezing. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, and I would say like touring, like if you're doing a tour with friends, I think, that's even a little bit different than if you're ski mountaineering racing or
Hmm.
skating or classic, where you're going kind of all out. You should be able to take in a little bit more frequently, like some fuel if you're backcountry touring, and maybe just having that discussion with
Yeah,
your partners, and I know that's
exactly. Yeah.
not always the conversation that someone wants to have with people, but maybe it'll get your friends feeling better too. Like I
Yeah.
think that could be a good thing.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like I mean, just thinking about other situations that I've been in with clients where I work with someone on a swim team, like,
Yeah.
a teenage swimmer, very competitive swimmer, and like coach isn't being very supportive of fueling. No one, I'm like, well, what is everyone else doing? Like, are other people stopping for water breaks, fuel breaks? They're like, no. Like, well, okay, this is not okay. And also, like, we need to change this whole like setup, right? So it's
Yeah.
hard when you're the only person, you're trying to get someone to like start doing something, but no one else around them is doing it, right? So yeah, exactly, we need to kind of get everyone else on board as well. um so what about elevation? And this, like, a lot of this is overlap, but obviously, really high elevation, and this affects like summer or other time of the year, like mountain running as well. But elevation, of course, changes what we're able to do, and what we're able to tolerate, and how much we need, and all of that. So kind of combining that with everything else, what would you like to share about nutrition needs and our ability to kind of take things in, appetite, hydration needs, all
Yeah.
that stuff?
Well, the unfortunate part is the appetite typically goes down at elevation,
Yep. Yep.
and then the needs go up.
Exactly.
So So yeah, I mean, your carb needs typically go up, and then your fluid needs are also increasing, which then increases because you're typically losing more fluids. Then you need more. Then you're losing more electrolytes, so you need more of those. So it's tricky because some people might feel even like a bit nauseous
Yeah.
at altitude, and so I think this brings up a good convo about what is going to be your backup if that happens. And that's something we typically address with athletes. If we're coming up with a fueling plan, like I always have people be like, okay, like this is perfect day, and then what are we going to do when something doesn't go well?
Hmm.
So how do we adapt in that situation? So if you're if the nausea is there and then you're saying, well, I'm just not going to take anything in, that's typically going to make the problem worse.
Mm-hmm.
So figuring out like, how am I going to address this? Like, do I take in, try some ginger chews? Do I just try at that point? Do I have liquid nutrition? Because I can't really chew anything. I need to make sure, like, the other things that you've got to consider when you're at altitude are, if I've got increased fluid requirements, then how am I going to carry those, or how am I going to refill, or where am I going to get fluids from? You know what I mean? And that's always
Mm-hmm.
a big problem too, for especially like, trail and ultra mountain runners, etc. Like, where am I going to get all these fluids? Because I can't carry the amount that I need for
Well,
this,
yeah. What do
like,
you? I mean, what do you
6 hour
do?
thing.
Yeah, what do you do in that situation?
In the winter, it's going to be tough because you don't have a lot. I mean, there's not a lot you can do in the winter. I would say, like, you would have to carry more. And I would typically say that those kind of situations are really going to involve more like slower backcountry touring. So in those cases, like, you might be able to take more anyways because you're going at a little bit slower pace, and it's just not as big of a factor. But like, if you're Nordic skiing, typically like the tracks or trails like are going to come back to the car or come back to a start point. So you could always refill there during like practice, etc. And then with ski mountaineering, same thing. Like, oftentimes a lot of people that are doing ski mountaineering are practicing on a resort, like a ski resort that's groomed. So they're touring on the resort and they can go up and down and up and down. And so you can always refill at like the bathrooms or something at the ski resort or something like that. Now in a race, like, they're still going to have, so the thing about the race is they'll still have aid stations.
Yeah.
So I would say like the main challenge would probably be more affecting the backcountry touring people that might be out for a really long tour. So anticipating that, and you might need to bring more. The other thing I would say too that we didn't mention, I totally can't believe this like blew past me, is the bringing hot fluids, like
Oh yeah.
like actually filling bottles with hot water versus cold, and that can be really nice. I find that even with my backcountry tours, like they oftentimes, like, you might have a backpack or something, because you've got to put your skins somewhere. So you've got to store those like in a backpack. So in that case, you might be able to bring like a thermos with hot water or hot tea, like a hot sport tea with
hot chocolate.
Yeah.
That's what I would bring.
Hot chocolate,
Hot
hot sport tea with like sugar in it or something like that. It can be really nice. And like, again, it's typically with touring, like, it's not about like the speed that you're going. It's about like getting up high and getting good views, and then you get to ski or snowboard down. So it's a little bit more relaxed anyways. That's not to say that you shouldn't pay attention to your nutrition though, because this gets into another, sorry, I'm going off on all these tangents. If you aren't paying attention to your nutrition and hydration and you are in the backcountry, that can be a risk or a liability for your partner that you're with, because the decision, you need to have fuel to make the right decisions when it's very risky avalanche wise. So you have to be able to like assess, is this a good idea for us to do this? Like, do this line that we're planning on skiing, or is it not a good idea? And, if somebody is bonking when they're at the top of a peak, like, that's probably not the best situation to put others in as well when you're putting your group at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have a really stupid question. Can you do anything with snow or water? Like, I guess you can't really melt it though, so that probably wouldn't work, right?
Well,
but like, is that ever an option in treating it, or just, I mean, again, this is me just being ignorant with this stuff.
I wish I could fully 100% say like I should know, but it's not. I've actually done that before. However, I'm not sure what the risk in regards
like
to
just eating the snow.
Yeah, I've put it in a bottle and like put it next to my core, and it has melted. My main concern, which I don't know, this is what I don't really know, is what is the risk of Giardia or something
Yeah.
do that.
Oh, but if it's fresh powder, like, isn't it more like, it's probably fine?
Probably. You would hope so. And I mean, I'm not going to say like that someone's not taking a risk doing that. I guess I should put a disclaimer there.
Yeah. No, obviously. Yeah, for sure. Because I like that, because that was my first thought. I was like, what about all the snow? Like, you're really out of water, like, and you're really desperate. Like, I guess that's what you would do. And I guess the other thing I was thinking about, more of a thought than a question, is, when it comes to like high altitude running, and again, I'm thinking back to like ultra running, because that's a lot of what I work with. But a lot of times the recommendations are like small sips, little nibbles, little bites, like really frequent, like in terms of combating, maybe nausea or loss of appetite or things like that. But when it's cold and you have poles or you have gloves, it's like that is just so much harder to do. So I guess if you have the liquid fuel, that's easier. But yeah, it's just another one of those strategies that is harder to achieve to kind of deal with the challenges, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to kind of think about too. So obviously the intensity that we're going is going to maybe affect like the choices of fuel that we're putting into the fueling plan, but in knowing that maybe I won't be able to get as much in, and we look at the say it's like just for example the Grand Traverse that I was saying, like it is a backcountry ski race. There are moments of higher intensity, but I would say like in the grand scheme of things, it's not as intense as like doing a running trail race. And so we're probably able to use a little bit more fat as fuel. So like when we look at consuming like a little bit more fat, there's going to be more calorie consumption going on. So even if we're taking in a little bit less, we might still be getting equal calories as to if we were doing like all straight carbohydrates. Now, I'm not saying don't take in carbohydrates. I want to clarify that. Because I always get people that are like, oh, I'm my low carb, high fat thing. We still want to have a minimum of like 40 grams of carbs an hour coming in. But I'm saying like you could utilize some fat as an additional calorie source, which would then allow for you to maybe take in a little less volume. And then the super fuels, like I said, I've been having pretty good success with those for my skiers, and then even my mountain bikers that race. Using a super fuel has been nice for some of them too, just because they're in a similar situation with like not wanting to take their hands off the handlebars and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I've also told them that with clients.
Yeah.
It's just so annoying to drink. But so you're talking about like the Scratch Super Fuel and then like the more concentrated Morton, or which other products are you doing?
Yep. The Scratch Super Fuel and the Morton are the main ones. Yep. Those are the main ones that I recommend right now. That's not to say that more companies won't come out with stuff, but yeah, that's the main ones.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. What other, so we mentioned like gear. Are there any other like specific products that you like or recommend to clients that you might want to share that kind of are helpful? Anything that comes to mind that you haven't already mentioned?
I'm trying to think, because I was you mentioned the small bites and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Like there's so many different things that that come to mind when I'm working with these athletes, and sometimes I don't have them fully organized on this list. We're like in a conversation with an athlete and we're like troubleshooting, and then we're like, oh, okay, like this is what I would do in this situation, or this is what I would do in this situation. But I don't know. I mean, I think like to the point that we were making earlier about, I do want to emphasize that pre-workout fueling is still really important and maybe needed to be adjusted for your winter sports. Maybe if your typical intake is only like 400 calories before you go and do a, I don't know, like 75 to 90-minute run or something, or a 2-hour run or something, then a ski of equal duration, you might want to do more just so that you have your system like even more topped off, which then might affect your timing. So I think the important thing that I want to emphasize to people is that your sport that you're doing and the race goals that you have should help you determine like what adjustments do I need to make to my fueling plan and like beforehand. So it should be a fluid thing. Like yes, I like for people to kind of use the similar pre-exercise fueling option because your gut kind of adapts to that.
Yeah.
But do we need to maybe like add a little bit to that to make it a little bit more dense calorie wise or carb wise or whatever? We need to change the timing of that. What do we want to do fluid wise? So fluid needs too, I want to be clear on this, that fluid needs are going to change whether you're at, altitude or in the cold or in the heat or in the humidity. And I think that's an important reminder to athletes. And I don't know what you have athletes do, but I like to have athletes think about maybe I do need to do some regular fluid loss testing just to kind of get some awareness around how are my fluid losses changing as I am in these different climates or at altitude versus not. Now you might not have that option if you're racing at altitude and you're living at sea level, but if you take a training trip or something and you're able to do that as an option, like I would make it happen. Typically we're looking at like, just for reference, about 1.5 times the intake for fluids compared to so at altitude 1.5 times of intake compared to at sea level. Just as a reference for people if they can't get to altitude and do the fluid loss testing. But I guess my point is regular fluid loss testing. I like to do that with athletes at different times of the year, and then also different fitness levels, your fluid losses are going to change. So then that allows for you to determine what are my fluid needs for my fueling plan and how are those maybe going to change a little bit. And then that also, your fluid losses impact your electrolyte losses. So trying to make adjustments there too.
No, exactly. I do the same. I have my clients do regular sweat testing as it makes sense to do it and as they're willing to do it. But I do find like a lot of people are just so resistant to taking in adequate fluids. Some people are not, and they're willing to like carry things, but some people just hate carrying. And then of course, just the annoyance of having to stop for the bathroom, which is even like worse when you're on a mountain, right? Like so that's the piece that must be difficult too, is like the, cold weather diuresis, it leads to kind of more frequent, peeing anyways, but then on top of it, like you're also trying to take in more fluid. So I'm sure like you get a lot of pushback there. I don't know. I
do.
Yeah.
I do.
Carrying fluid. Like, I'm not carrying water. I'm like, well, how do you expect to practice your hydration strategy?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And and people will be like, well, I don't want to have to pee. And it's kind of like, well, I try to explain, actually, what I usually do is try to explain to them the impact that dehydration or not having enough electrolytes coming in is going to affect your utilization of the calories that you're taking in as well. So if we explain that to athletes, and yes, it does impact your ability to be able to utilize those calories and put you at risk, I would say a higher risk of GI distress, then that sometimes actually motivates people because they're like, oh, well, then I'm not able to utilize that fuel as much as I'm taking in. I better prioritize the fluids too and the electrolytes. And so for people like trying to have an understanding of how all of these pieces kind of integrate with each other. Like it's not something where we can just say we just pull out and isolate the calories and just look at that. I think like looking at something as an overall how does this thing affect the other thing, et cetera, can be really helpful too to think about,
Yeah, No, absolutely. Is there anything else that we haven't mentioned that you want to
I
mention?
don't think so. I hope that I gave some good tips and gave some
You
good
did.
understanding for people to kind of be able to utilize in their own if they are doing winter sports, or even if there's any RDs listening that, that maybe you get a few ideas for your own clients. And there are things that, some of this stuff we're not like taught all of these things in school.
Exactly. It's all experience and just discovery.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it's important though that then we have that understanding of these are the challenges that are facing this athlete population. So then we're better able to help them in the plans that we're making for them, the discussions that we're having. Because if we just throw a traditional fueling plan at someone that's doing winter sports, that's not going to fly when they go out and practice it. They're going to be like, wait, what? This makes no sense at all. So
yeah, totally. So you said you use Scratch. What other products are some of your favorites for yourself?
I often use the Scratch Super Fuel myself just because I really like that little bit of higher calorie intake from liquids. And I also use the untapped maple syrup is another one of my favorites.
I've heard of it. I haven't tried it though myself.
Oh yeah, it's quite good. So that's good. But also I've had clients just use their own maple syrup and put it in a reusable flask.
Yeah, nice.
So it's saving money that way. Then, I mean, the Spring and Mirror energy gels are really really tasty. I love those. I
love Spring. Yeah, same.
Yeah, especially for, again, like backcountry touring or things that might be a little bit lower intensity sport-wise. They're a little bit lower glycemic, and I think that they tend to sit well, like even ultra running, like they're a really good option. And then I also really like base performance salts for an additional electrolyte source. So are you familiar with those?
Are those the ones that you tap on your tongue or something?
Yeah, so it's like a little tube that has.
Yes. I haven't used it, but one of my clients used it and was telling me about it.
Yeah, I kind of like those because it's like it's like a little micro dose of electrolyte. So then it allows for people to maybe get even a little more dialed on their electrolyte intake and not, sometimes I run into the problem with athletes taking in salt pills and then they end up taking those and it's like too much or just a big hit at one time and their stomach gets upset from that.
Yeah.
So I do like the base for like a little bit extra if needed, and want to be clear for people that are listening, like you don't always need extra electrolytes. Sometimes I feel like it's like overemphasized, but you got to look at what everything you're doing in your fueling plan and then decide if you need extra.
Yeah, exactly.
And then another one of my favorites is actually, I like Cliff Blocks. I think they're really, I like to just like pop one in my mouth and like let it just like, if I'm not feeling as hungry or like I feel like I am a little bit, like you were saying earlier, it's like a small bite and then know how many calories you're getting in. Yeah. So it's one of my favorite products too, is just the Cliff Blocks.
Those things are like rocks in the cold though.
Okay. Yeah. If we're talking about cold weather, those are terrible ideas.
They're terrible. That's another one of the things like my husband discovered in a race where he's like, I can't eat my nutrition. It's too cold.
Oh yeah. Gummies are a really bad idea in winter sports. I should have clarified. I didn't know if we were talking about like
Oh no, I asked you generally. Yeah, I didn't ask you every. I always think about like as a kid, like or just anytime like getting like ice cream or froyo and doing the toppings and like getting gummy bears. I'm like, this sucks. Like, why did I do this?
Yeah, exactly. And you're like like break your teeth.
Yes, exactly. Oh my god. But yeah, no, I've done that too with the Cliff block where I just like kind of stuck it a long time. But I mean, it takes forever. But yes, that is a good way of getting a little bit in. And do you have any other like stories or personal experiences you want to share in terms of other races you've done, out like in terms of like other things like the Grand Traverse, or maybe other things you want to share about the Grand Traverse, other races you have coming up?
Yeah,
I'd
no,
love to.
I think the something like the Grand Traverse is a unique race. And it's something that, again, you would want to, like, if you have a quote normal fueling plan for maybe an ultra race, you'd probably want to modify that for the Grand Traverse. It is still kind of an ultra race, but at the same
Mhm.
time, wanting to think about, oh yeah, I'm going to be, it's going to be freaking freezing cold. Like, how am I going to carry my fluids? Like, and this is something everyone should be doing, like, where are the aid stations, like,
Yeah,
out on
yeah.
course, because it might be a long ways until you get to an aid station. You better have enough fuel to get you there.
How far apart were they?
I can't honestly fully remember, but in the 39-mile race, I believe there were like 4 aid stations.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't terrible, but also, like, it does require you
To carry
the
a bit.
yeah, you have to carry a lot, and the gear requirements
Oh,
are
I bet.
really significant because it's like a safety
Yeah,
issue.
yeah.
So, like, you're carrying this pack and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so heavy. Like, um, so that, and actually for me, something that I wish I would have done is actually practice a little bit more at night, like skinning and skiing at night. Because I did actually experience and it's hard to fully practice this, but I did experience some nausea at like 2 in the morning.
Mm,
And the race starts at midnight. And so that was like near the beginning. And
yeah.
that's kind of just like, it's kind of tough. Like, if you experience that beginning and trying to get out of that and being in a little bit of a hole was not great. But I was able to, at the aid stations, like, they have really good, like, broth and bread
Oh,
and things like that.
yes.
So it's kind of a lifesaver when you get to those places, if you really are having a hard time, like, choking down, what you've brought with you.
Mhm, mhm.
And at the time when I did the race, that was back in I want to say 2016 or 17.
Mhm.
The super fuels were not a thing at that time.
Yeah.
It was actually before, so whenever that was, it was before Morton and Scratch Super Fuel
Mhm.
option. So it was like not an option to do a higher calorie drink mix.
Mhm.
So, again, like, I would, I use those now because I think they're just so beneficial. And I would say another mistake that I made was maybe not bringing enough, um, like, more solid food, or like, baked goods, etc.
Mhm.
On it in the Grand Traverse. I was like, oh, I'll just use like the gels that I've been skiing with and the hydration
Yeah.
mix,
Yeah.
and it wasn't great. It was a good learning experience because actually it wasn't that's the longest race I've done. It ended up being like, we did 11 hours or something. So,
Uh-huh.
and I haven't done like 100 milers or anything.
Uh-huh.
So that was the longest race I'd done, and I hadn't, you know, I didn't have the experience that, like, oh yeah, maybe I should take
Mhm.
more solid food options. Like, just wasn't thinking in that sense. So,
Yeah.
experience makes a difference too. Like, if
Absolutely.
you're I'm not saying that you should go out and like totally wing it. And that's why this podcast is really helpful for people, because then you can gain tips from us on, like, oh, okay, here's what I need to maybe think about planning for, and like think about as challenges that I might not have considered before. um,
Absolutely. For sure.
um, that, and then I wish, like I said, I wish I would have had a backup myself for, like, maybe ginger or something to maybe help with nausea, because
Mhm.
I didn't, I hadn't experienced that in training, and I wasn't thinking I was going to experience that in the race, and I did. And so that was a new thing for me. And I did not have, again, didn't take my full advice, and did not have my backup, like, nausea plan.
Yeah. It's so GI stuff is so tricky, and the longest I've been doing recently since having kids is like 50K, so that's kind of like my go-to distance. I do like 2 a year or whatever, but I've been dealing with like my own like nausea or stomach issues like at certain points and trying to like pinpoint what's going on, and clients, it's just like such a common issue. I mean, for you in this specific case at night, do you think it had to do with just like the timing of everything and like your body's just out of whack, not used to it? Like, do you think that was the cause of it, or what did you think was the cause? Did you have any sense of it?
I think keeping in mind that circadian rhythm is probably going to have an impact, and impact everyone differently, which is one of the reasons why I wish I might have like even practiced late at night a couple times just to see. But that, and then sometimes I think we're like, oh, the food that I've eaten is causing the nausea, but I think the fluid and electrolyte piece can be a big contributor as well. And maybe I didn't quite have enough at the beginning as I should have, because it's like, you're starting off, you're kind of cold, like there's all the kind of like excitement and hype, and maybe I don't know if that was the full thing. I'd lean more towards the circadian rhythm thing, but it could have been a contributing factor as well.
Yeah. What's your own kind of, you said you had like a kind of nausea plan or something. What is our backup plan? Like what's your nausea backup plan?
So kind of like I was saying, well, not, so again, are we talking about winter versus summer? I feel like I haven't I haven't run into it in the winter as much anymore because I haven't done a night race in the winter except for the Grand Traverse. And I don't do like I'm not really doing like a lot of longer ski races, which is where I would likely experience nausea. But in the summer, Cliff Block, again, like that's my kind of go-to, and that's why I carry the super fuel. I find that like sometimes ginger chews work, sometimes they don't. So it's kind of like, again, troubleshooting. I have had athletes do I've had like physician athletes do like Zofran in the middle of a ultra race.
That's intense.
I know. I'm like, I don't know about that, but you go for it. Yeah.
I think the only time I took Zofran was when I was having like intense like morning sickness or something during pregnancy.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm like, okay, whatever works for you. Cool. Let's maybe try and improve the fueling plan as well instead of just relying on that.
It's like popping an Imodium or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's it probably wouldn't be my like first choice, but
gotta do what you gotta do though, I guess at some point.
Yeah, and I think it's important I'm glad that we're talking about this because I think it's important to highlight that even if you have, and I'm not saying you shouldn't dial out your fueling plan, don't take it the wrong way, whoever's listening, but even if you have the perfectly most dialed fueling plan, something can still go wrong. Especially with the ultra races. And so that's where like being prepared with an option that could work for a backup plan would be great. And I also chat with athletes a lot about like when you are to get to an aid station, like what are you going to be most comfortable consuming? And then like, are you consuming the right amount of things, like calorie wise, those sorts of things, like what would be the best choices for you? And then also thinking about when you leave that aid station, if you just had 500 calories, do you need to have another 100 calories in the 10 minutes after you leave the aid station? Maybe not. Like, thinking about that kind of stuff too. I think, like, again, some of this is getting into like heavy details, but a lot of ultra athletes and triathletes are very detail oriented, so they kind of like analyzing that sort of thing. And if you have access to the course profile too, it can be nice to think about like where the big climbs are and what does that look like for me nutritionally on the big climbs versus what's flat and what's downhill and that sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. Last question before I get into my kind of quick bites questions at the end. What are you up to this winter season? What does your own training look like?
So I honestly have been struggling with some health issues lately.
Oh no,
Since
sorry.
since last May, which is trending more towards looking like long COVID, which
Oh
is
wow.
a little. It kind of it's just not fun trying to figure it out. But because of that, like I do a lot of just like really fun um tours with I have two Australian shepherds, so they
Hmm.
love the snow. We do a lot of like backcountry touring that's a little lower intensity, or
Hmm.
we have a lot of access to free Nordic trails around here,
Oh
which is really
nice.
nice. So I'll go on a skate ski with my dogs. It's just I'm actually like intentionally trying not to race at the moment, well, until I get
Hmm.
this like fully under control, and then trying to figure out like what I'm going to do next. But my husband is doing a bunch of there's a lot of like in Colorado there's a lot of ski mountaineer races.
Hmm.
And so those take place at the end of January, February, and March. So if anyone out there is like really wants to do some ski mountaineering racing, then come to Colorado, because that's where a lot of the races are.
That's awesome. Can you like literally ski from your house?
No, but I can get to. I wish we used to live in Crested. We used to live in Crested Butte, like at the base of the ski resort there, but that was
Nice.
only for like a year and a half.
Okay.
But now it's about a 10-minute drive to get to the Nordic trails, which are pretty
That's not
nice.
bad.
And then, downhill and ski mountaineering is like 30 to 40 minutes, which isn't terrible.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. All right. So let's do some quick questions and we'll wrap things up. What is your favorite meal or snack when you're in a hurry?
I would say pecans and tart cherries. I know it's random, but I really like that. Or like I make a little trail mix that has chocolate chips, pecans, and dried cherries.
Oh, yum. Do you have Trader Joe's near you?
No, I
They
wish.
have they have like these like candied pecans and also these like sweet and spicy pecans that are just so delicious.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've had those like the hail snacks that are those type of things,
Yeah,
and those
yeah.
are so good.
Awesome. What about when you're not in a hurry?
Um, Not in a hurry. I would say this is gonna probably sound lame, but I actually really like doing either just a general PB&J sandwich or a Greek yogurt with a homemade granola and a bunch of fruit, like a big bowl of something like that.
Yum. Both classic choices.
Yep.
Favorite post-race meal or snack? Or post-workout?
Post-workout. I actually really like the this is also gonna be lame, but I like scratch recovery mix.
Hmm.
It's super tasty to me. And then I might add like a piece of fruit to that just to get a little bit higher carb bump.
Awesome. What about your biggest cooking catastrophe, if you had one?
Cooking catastrophe. Well, I've never set anything on fire, so that'll be good. I am not sure that I have one of those. I'm
That's
sorry.
good. That's a good thing then.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. That's totally fine. What about most bizarre or exotic food that you've ever tried?
Um, hmm. I don't. So exotic wise, I wouldn't say I've had anything bizarre. Like I haven't like really eaten crickets or anything like that. But when we went to Nepal, I did some trekking in Nepal for a month, and doing some of the local cuisine there is. I mean, it's out a little bit exotic or outside the box. It was really tasty, and then also it's not super exotic, but Ethiopian food
Mm,
is really tasty, but also something I don't really have the opportunity to have very often. And um, whenever I go somewhere that has Ethiopian food, I always get it.
yeah, it's so delicious. There was a place in New York that we used to go to when we were in the city. Like every once in a while, that was yummy.
Yeah,
How do you like your eggs cooked if you eat eggs?
over hard.
What is your favorite beverage?
Beverage. I really like the Spindrift.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
So,
what foods remind you of growing up, or what are your comfort foods?
Chicken pot pie, because I am from South Central Pennsylvania and near like Amish country.
Oh,
And
okay.
there's a lot of like my grandma used to make like homemade pot pie, which is really one of my favorite meals. And that would be like a really comfort like food, as well as your standard like homemade mac and cheese is like one of my favorites too.
Yeah. What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Coffee actually.
Yum. And last question, top 3 items of gear that are most essential to your active lifestyle.
A hydration pack. and then and I really like Solomon S Lab hydration pack. It's like a really nice material, doesn't chafe or anything. And then I would say my trail running shoes. I wear the Hoka Challenger.
I wear those. Yep.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Yeah.
They're awesome. And then also it's a tie-up between like if I am doing mountain trail stuff, I like to have poles. Or
which ones do you use?
I've got the Black Diamond. I forget the name of them. They're Black Diamond ones. Okay. What do you have?
I don't actually have poles yet. My husband just got some. Because, I mean, the trails out here in California, a lot of them like are pretty, not as technical as out on the East Coast. But with the amount of climbing I did my last 50K, it was like 7,000 feet over 50K. I really would have benefited from some poles.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
So I need to get some.
Yeah. I think they're Black Diamond Z poles is what they're called now that I'm thinking about it. And then, so it's a toss up between that. And then if we're talking winter sports, I really like, so I never, and this is the other thing, I never actually grew up skiing, but I started skiing when I moved to Colorado in 2009. So skate skiing is like my favorite. So my skate skis, I really would, love to have those too. If I had to pick 3 things. So that's 4 things. I get that. But there's also like 2 seasons. So
I know.
Or like 2 different
I'll give you an
sports.
extra. I'll give you an extra.
Awesome.
Are skate skis just shorter? Like, how are they different?
They are, well, and you're asking me technical gear stuff, which I don't always have the best answer for. They're actually like skinnier and a little bit longer.
Oh, okay. Got it.
And then the classic are going to be a little bit wider, and they also have more, like the bottoms are a little bit different, so they like grip the snow a little bit more.
There's so many, and then there's like cross country skis, which are also different. Like so different.
Well, those skis. That's gonna be your that's your classic skis are gonna be the ones that we're talking about, the little bit wider with the.
Got it. Okay.
They oftentimes have what's called fish scales on the bottom, so that it kind of like grips the snow a little bit more, so you can get your kick and glide in. Whereas skate skis, you have like, it's more similar to ice skating when you're like form wise. So you don't have that on the bottom.
That's one of my goals for this year is we're trying to get like up to the snow, because we're like really only like, a few hours away from amazing snow, which so it's silly that we don't go there. We just haven't brought the kids yet, but we haven't seen snow since we left New York City, when we left like right after a blizzard, basically. So,
oh, wow.
So maybe someday I can get back into winter sports, but in the meantime, I'm going to be happy with all of my or just trail running. So.
Yeah. You can't complain about that. A lot of people don't even have access to trails to run on, which is so awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kylee, so much for coming on. Where can everyone find you online?
Yeah, so I'm at flynutrition.org is my website. And then I mostly focus on Instagram, which is flynutrition3.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kylee, and hope you have an awesome winter season.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Kylee, for your time and for sharing your nutrition expertise with my audience today. Again, you can find Kylee over at flynutrition.org or flynutrition3 on Instagram if you'd like to reach out to her. I know this show has been incredibly sporadic since I started it back in, August 2019. So I decided a goal for this show is to be more consistent in 2023. It's really not realistic for me to be putting out a ton more episodes, but I'll be aiming to put out 1 episode a month to start and see how that goes. So rather than just hitting publish as soon as I record something, I'll try to be a little more consistent with how I put it out. You can, of course, help by sharing the show with your friends. And if you haven't already, leaving a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts. It is very much appreciated. I hope 2023 is off to a great start for you all. Thank you for your ongoing support. See you next time.